If you wish to add a material or texture to an object, either process is very simple. However, either of them require you to do one simple step first. Under Material, click New, and this is where you add a color. It doesn't matter what color you add, just as long as you add a color so as to create a surface to your object. And then you can do a number of other things like diffuse, specular, shading, transparency, and all these other tools. Or you go into Texture, click New, and now you can add some textures to your object like wood, voxel, Vroni, Stucci, if that's how you pronounce it. Or you can even have your own custom image that you use by clicking Image or Movie and then clicking Open, and wherever on whatever hard drive you have your image, you can add it to your project. In addition to being able to change the text of your text object, you can also do other stuff similar to how you can do text in Word. You have the option for a font and the option for a paragraph. Now I'm not going to go into this because it all depends on, well, like left, center, right, justify, flush. Using whichever option you need will just basically depend on how best you want to put your text on screen. Instead, you can change the font to being regular, bold, italic, or bold or italic by clicking here to open up the Explorer menu and just going to whichever folder or drive you have your font and selecting that, and you can change your font. One thing I found very useful very early on was being able to add volume to a text object. Now you'll notice that I am rather zoomed away from this object, and you'll see why. Go up here, click the font looking icon, go down to Geometry, and under Extrude, so you can select that or even using any of the arrows, and just move it back and forth, and you can add volume to your object. Now I don't know how many objects can have volume added to them, so of all of these you just have to go through and looking at each of these icons, find whichever one has this option, Geometry, look for Extrude, and then you'll be able to add volume to your object. A keyframe, in my opinion, is part of the very essence of animation. It allows you to place an object in one position for one frame, and then, moving down the timeline, place that object in another position, and the animation program knows to render that movement in the final render. You can add free keyframes in at least one of two ways. Select your object in the 3D environment. Once you have your object where you want it positioned, press I to bring up the keyframe menu, and then select whatever options you want for the object in this position. For example, if you plan on moving it and then rotating it, and here's how to rotate, you press R, and then depending if you're wanting to rotate it in the X, Y, or Z position, if you want to snap the rotation, I press X, I rotate it down, press I have locked in the location and the rotation, and now I move it down here, rotate it back into its original position, keyframe it, location, rotation. Well, it would help if I actually did it on the timeline. Now I'll move this back up here, fix what I had originally done before. By the way, to move it you have to right click on the object and then move it, and then you can let go of the right button because it has locked onto the object, and then left click it when you get into the position. And now, moving down the timeline, the object is moving and rotating at the same time. Now the other way to do this is this. Here is the dope sheet, which basically you click that and select dope sheet. And as you can see, the text object has two actions for two different areas on the time frame. Now this hasn't happened to me before, except for one time before. Otherwise, I've never had this problem. If you end up needing to add a keyframe somewhere, you press I, but it doesn't bring up this as much as it brings up a warning right here. You can go down here, press key, and it will insert keyframes, and basically will insert keyframes for whatever happens to the object that is not. One tool I found particularly useful is something called alpha channel. Now I found this useful for two reasons. One, I had a project which I had an object placed in a certain position and I needed it to fade in, but I didn't want to create a keyframe to pull it in because it would be noticeable. And I had an object on a Bezier curve that I wanted it to disappear after a certain point, but I didn't want to add keyframes to try to complicate matters. Now the way you do this is going up to here, Materials, selecting Transparency. This is the alpha channel. Now the default is at 1 because that is completely solid. Now, putting your marker at one point on the timeline, you can take your alpha channel all the way down, press I for keyframe, and then putting at another point, bring your alpha channel all the way up, press I for keyframe, and now you have text that will become translucent. Now I prepared this ahead of time, and I have added a spotlight so that you can see how this works. Now you can see the text barely visible here, which I'm going to guess that means it didn't become completely transparent, but when properly applied can become completely transparent. And going to the other side, it is completely visible. I imagine that the reason why it's not transparent here is I had reflection enabled, but that's an easy fix. Anyways, this can be useful for the object itself as well as its shadow. As you can see, casting alpha. 0 means no shadow. 1 means fully visible shadow.